Oh, hello, my friends. Last week, CBS was set to air a documentary about migrant detention centers in El Salvador. But just hours before it was set to go live, it was inexplicably pulled off air. The documentary centered on three Venezuelan men who were living in the United States: a barber, a makeup artist, and a former professional soccer player. Now, all three men were deported and sent to this migrant detention facility after the US government deemed them members of Tren de Aragua, which is a Venezuelan gang. But here's the crazy part. They weren't classified as gang members based on anything they had done in the past. They were classified as gang members because of their tattoos. Franco Tiapa had a pocket watch marking the time of his daughter's birth. André Romero had crown tattoos on his wrists, and the soccer player, Jersey Barrios, had a Real Madrid badge. Now, criminology experts say that these tattoos are not gang symbols, and what's more, the gang that they are accused of being part of has actually come out to say that they do not use tattoos to mark their own members. So all of this got me thinking, how is it that tattoos can become a tool to subvert due process and testimony and court of law? And why is it that tattoos can be art on some bodies, but criminal evidence on others? So to understand this, I wanted to go way back to figure out how tattoos have been used throughout history, how they've been used for individual expression and for social control over the years. So let's dive in. So the oldest known tattoo belongs to Utsi the Iceman, who was living around the year 3300 BC. So he had about 61 tattoos that were made of soot, and they were aligned around different pain points, like joints. So these tattoos were probably therapeutic and not like decorative or religious. But that's just the oldest tattoo that we know of because his body was preserved in ice, hence the name Iceman. Really, tattoos have probably been around for as long as modern humans have been around. And I'll give you a few examples, because if you start to study tattoos in Antiquity, you see that they were used for all kinds of different reasons. So for example, in ancient Egypt during the Middle Kingdom, which was about 2000 BCE, we started to see tattoos on the mummies of women at Bir el-Bahari. So these tattoos are connected to fertility or protection, and they were probably religious rather than medicinal or decorative. In ancient Rome, the word for tattooing was stigma or stigmata, and tattoos functioned as a tool of punishment and control. So they were actually used to mark slaves and criminals. So in the 1st century BCE, enslaved people could be tattooed on the forehead with the word fugitus, which meant runaway, to prevent them from being able to get away free if they were to run away. The scholar Seneca, who is a well-known scholar today and lived at that time, actually wrote about this a number of times. And from the 1st to 3rd centuries AD in Rome, convicted criminals who were sent to mines or arenas were tattooed on the face or limbs with a permanent record of their crimes, which is pretty wild. In Imperial China, especially during the Qin and Han periods, facial tattooing was also used as criminal punishment. So all of this to say that historically, tattoo practices weren't that different from how we use tattoos today. They were art and medicinal and energetic and therapeutic, and sometimes they were used to control people, which happened very famously not that long ago. By the way, I am painting a photo of Aman Lau, who is a shaman from the Mentawai people of modern-day Indonesia. The Mentawai people have an incredible tradition of tattooing for spiritual and medicinal purposes. This photo was taken by a tattoo anthropologist named Lars Krutak, who travels the world exploring tattoos in different cultures. So his stories are incredible. I spent way too long going down a rabbit hole of some of the cultures that he's come across in his work. I summarized some of these stories into a Patreon post, which is in the comments below. So if you're interested, that also links out to his photography and some of his own work. Check that link out if you want. It's free. So every culture has a long lineage of tattoo and body decoration. But because I want to come to those three men that I started with at the beginning of this video, I'm going to follow the path of Christian society into medieval Europe and then Victorian England, and then I'll come to the United States because that's where those three men were living when all of this happened. So when Christianity became the governing force of Europe, that is really one of the first times that tattooing became taboo. So Pope Hadrian I in 787 AD outlawed tattooing. So he cited Leviticus 19:28, which states, "You shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead, or put tattoo marks upon yourselves. I am the Lord." You can't really argue with that. So it's part of an Old Testament law that distinguishes Israelites from surrounding pagan cultures, specifically forbidding self-mutilation or ritualistic markings for idol worship or dead gods. Now, some Christians around this time did continue to get tattoos, so the tradition of Christian pilgrims receiving tattoos has been documented since the 8th century. In Coptic Christianity specifically, tattooing was often done to identify oneself as a Christian. The specific Coptic practice of tattooing a cross on the inside of the wrist may have originated from Ethiopian custom and served as a method of ethnic and religious identification in a prominently Muslim society. So Crusaders also began to receive tattoos as a memorial of their time in the Holy Land. In fact, Razuk Tattoo still exists in Jerusalem, and the family that runs it began tattooing Christians in the 14th century. Around the 16th century, European explorers began to encounter indigenous people across the Pacific Ocean who were sporting all kinds of tattoos. So this is a painting called Pintados, or The Painted Ones, by a Spanish artist who visited the Philippines in 1595. And a lot of modern tattoo culture today is inspired by the Pacific Islander tradition. In fact, the word tattoo comes from the Tahitian word tatao, which means to mark. Now, this is a really interesting time in the history of tattoos because you have two juxtaposing forces. On the one hand, a lot of sailors in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries were going out and encountering heavily tattooed communities of Pacific Islanders, and they were getting their own tattoos, and they were bringing this tattoo culture back to port cities like London and Marseille and New York. At the same time, you had Christian missionaries who were going to these Pacific islands like Hawaii and Tahiti and banning the practice of tattoos, which were seen as sinful or savage. And in my opinion, this is where the real definition of tattoo as taboo comes from, because tattoo bans accompanied attempts to civilize societies. So tattoos on poor and marginalized people were deemed uncivilized and stigmatized. And that's what has carried through to today. You could say that that is the seed of why tattoos are seen as uncivilized or unevolved today by a lot of the old guard. But it's not quite that simple, because in Victorian England, tattooing occupied a strange dual status. It was stigmatized among the poor, but it became a sought-after aesthetic for Victorian noble ladies. So by the mid-19th century, public tattooed ladies, such as Nora Hildebrandt, would display extensive tattoos in music halls and circuses, and other women would choose small and concealed tattoo designs on their wrists or ankles or shoulders, and they were often romantic or commemorative symbols. You can imagine a little heart with your noble lover's name if you're a Victorian lady. Tattooing became fashionable among parts of the elite, most famously when Edward VII, who was then Prince of Wales, was tattooed during imperial tours, which is an act that actually helped legitimize the practice of tattoos as cosmopolitan rather than crude. At the same time, professional tattooists established studios in London and near ports and near military districts, and tattoos increasingly came to be valued for artistry and symbolism. But this normalization was kind of uneven, so while elite and discreet tattoos were framed as tasteful or exotic, working class and highly visible tattoos, especially on women, were still pathologized by doctors and moral reformers. So Victorian England kind of signifies a lot of what we struggle with today, where the same tattoo can mean very different things on different people. A wealthy person in Victorian England could have a tattoo that could be seen as art and design, whereas a poor person in Victorian England would have a tattoo that could probably prevent them from getting a job or something worse. Now, in the US, tattoos never jumped to that sort of higher echelon of society as we saw in Victorian England. Instead, tattoos came in via port cities in the mid-1800s, and they were largely associated with like sailors and prisoners, and then that evolved into motorcycle clubs and never really hit polite society. So throughout the first half of the 20th century, tattoos became a symbol of counterculture and deviance, and that suspicion turned into law when in the 1960s, New York City and a handful of other US states actually banned tattooing. So they did this for a few reasons. They claimed that there was an outbreak of hepatitis B, which has since been contested by a lot of public health scholars. A lot of other people said that they were actually trying to clean up the city before the 1964 World's Fair. Now, whatever the reason, tattooing was banned from 1961 all the way to 1997 in New York City. In Massachusetts, it was banned until 2000, and Oklahoma didn't legalize tattooing until 2006. So tides started to turn in the 1990s as tattoo artists began to fight for legalization. And in the 2000s, celebrities started to get tattoos and show their tattoos, and I think that helped sort of destigmatize the idea of tattoos in general. In fact, among millennials and Gen Z, I would argue that tattoos are pretty destigmatized, and actually about 1 in 3 people in America today has a tattoo. If you take just women, black people, or LGBTQ people, almost 50% of those people have tattoos. So tattoos are clearly becoming more popular. And with all of this context, let's go back to those 3 migrants I talked about at the beginning of this episode. Because what strikes me is still how the same tattoo or the same concept of tattoos can mean art and symbol and status on one person and criminality and gang affiliation on another. So take, for example, Franco Tiapa's pocket watch versus this memento mori motif, which is pretty common in flash tattoo parlors. And last time I was in Portland, I saw about 50 of these in one day. So across Rome and Imperial China and medieval Europe and the past couple hundred years of United States, tattoos have gone between this sort of inscription and self-expression, where organizations or governments may try to inscribe people with what they believe a tattoo could mean, and they can also be a form of self-expression, something that people choose to get to display whatever they're interested in or something that's meaningful to them. The complication comes when certain people perceive tattoos to mean something that they don't mean, and that's clearly what's happening with these 3 migrants. So without ending on a political note, I just want to say that if you are interested in supporting these 3 migrants and others like them who may be wrongfully detained, you can do so using the links down below. There are organizations that are fighting for them every day, and I'm selling prints of this painting. If you're interested and you would like to purchase one, I'll donate 100% of your purchase to those organizations to help try to fight for these people. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Painting the Past.